Good morning, IOL students. This is Absalom Kahumba. I'm going to present to you the Natural Science and Health 1 examination conduct-based class. I know this year has been so hectic. We have been coupled or crippled by the impact of COVID-19, but that cannot actually disturb us so much. We still have to continue and live a normal life as usual, though we need to abide to the rules and regulation for the COVID-19. I'm not gonna wear the mask because you may not be able to hear my voice, but in the room where I am, I'm actually safe and I'm not in contact with anyone, so I think I'm not gonna pass on the COVID to anyone if I should I have it, but I have got tested and I do not have it. Thank you for that. Like I indicated earlier, this is a natural science and health one. That is a subject that I'm going to present to you. And should you have any questions, I have my contact details here given in this slide. You can also use that to communicate to me should you have any problem. My cell phone number is 0811 246753, and my email account is akahumba@gmail.com. So feel free to contact me and get assistance where you feel you need assistance, but not answers to questions. I'm going to give you some examination important notes that I have indicated here. These are just basic information that you need. You need to, during your examination, when you are preparing, you need to pay attention to learning outcomes of every unit, which are very important, and they are already outlined in your study guide. You also need to read and understand instruction carefully and question properly when you are in the examination room. So you need to do that. So because some of you are already teachers, so you always need to use practical examples where necessary to actually strengthen your answers when you are answering. Because when you do not give practical examples, then it shows you do not have a proper understanding or grasp of the cause itself. So, but then if you use that, that's quite important, and you are likely to get more marks for what you have provided as extra. You also need to provide satisfactory answers. Don't just write for the sake of writing. Make sure you write with a sense of mind. So when you write a sensible answer, you are likely to get a good mark. So, but if you just write for the sake of writing, maybe just to indicate that you have written anything which is not meaningful, so that is not satisfactory. You need to give a satisfactory answer. So, meaning do not write too little or too much. So, give what is required, and that also should also be able to be in line with the marks. So, according to the mark allocated to each question. So, that's how you should write. So, you need also to write neatly and legibly as possible. You know, it's not easy to read another person's handwriting, but make sure you write neatly and legibly so that whatever you have written can be readable. So take time to prepare yourself for exam, and that's very important. So if you do not prepare for exams, then you are going to be into trouble. So this is actually the examination-based conduct class. So it's rather content-based because we are not giving scopes or whatsoever, but rather giving you content-based classes on aspect that we feel need some additional information or explanation. And this is actually to make it easier for you to prepare for your examination. Excuse me. I'll first start with the three core functions of the public health. These are the most important functions of the public health. I've also placed a diagram here which indicates which are these core functions. The first one being the assurance, the assessment, as well as the policy development. That's what is found in this diagram. But the core component there is research. So it's based on research. So the first in the bullet form is that the assessment and the monitoring of the health of the community as well as population which are at risk, to identify them or identify the health problems as well as their priorities, and also to formulate public policies that are designed to solve identified local and national health problems and priorities. Also to ensure that all people have access to appropriate and co-effective care, including now the health promotion, disease prevention services, as well as evaluation of effectiveness of the care that is given. So those are the major functions for the public health. But when you look at what is happening in that under that diagram that you have on your right side of your hand, so it actually have the detailed part of it summarized. The other aspect that we have to look at today is condensation versus evaporation. I've realized there is always a confusion. People tend to confuse condensation and evaporation. So, but these are actually two distinct states, which are happening normally between gas and liquid. So, when the movement of gas to liquid, that is called condensation. But when you have the movement of the particle or the process that happens between water and liquid, that is actually now evaporation. I've also placed a diagram there to illustrate that. So evaporation and condensation are two processes through which matter changes from one state to another. So that's what happens. So it's now between gas and liquid, which may be water. So in condensation, the matter changes basically from a gas to liquid, and all matter all matter is made of tiny moving particles, which are now called molecules. So evaporation and condensation, they actually happen when this molecule now gain or lose energy in the form of heat. So what happens, particularly when you look at what is happening in the picture below there, it shows I'm actually in the cycle of water. So what happens when the sun light strikes on the water? So what is likely to happen is like the heat is supplied to the water, and that causes it now to evaporate. So when it evaporates, it evaporates and get into the atmosphere, at which it will reach a freezing point and then get condensed, and that's how clouds are now formed. And later on, we have what is called precipitation. So condensation is the opposite process of evaporation. So it involves now gaseous water molecule that are cooling down to the liquid state, and this usually happens in vapor form that is going up in the air, cooling down to form now cloud. That's what I have explained. So these are the differences that are found between the two terms or terminologies, condensation and evaporation. So it's the opposite of one another. So for movement of gases particles from from gases particles into liquid, that is condensation. And then if you have movement of that change of that state from liquid to gas, that is what we refer to as evaporation. There's a nice picture here again that illustrates that. So from my far right, left, you have the water body where you have now these spiraling arrows indicating the evaporation. Now that means the heat has been created, and then that water now tends to evaporate, get into the atmosphere where it reaches a freezing point, and then condensation takes place, which results later on into precipitation. On my far right, also some indication of how that happens. You have condensation there, and then precipitation, meaning you have water coming back again to the surface, where it can be used by plants also during the uptake, and you have now the infiltration. Infiltration also taking place, but that surface where water flows, that's where it can now be evaporated during that process of heat. When it's hot, obviously you have that happening. Then you have transpiration coming in, submarine, and later on great condensation. So, but the main aspect here that you have to take note of is the difference between condensation and evaporation. So this is how you can differentiate them. So, but the main source of heat here is the sun. One other aspect that we need to look at now here, which is also important, is light. Light is very important. So you may not be able to see if we will not have light. So, but what we need to take into cognizance is that our main source of light is mainly the sun. That's where we get light. So, and light travels in straight lines at the speed of about 160,000 miles per second. It's pretty much fast, and light waves also travel faster than the sound. So sometimes you realize, like when it's raining or rain seasons, you have a lightning, but you tend to hear the sound afterwards. So that means light is much faster than sound. So sound comes after the light. The lightning has already happened. So that is an indication or an example of how light travels faster than the sound waves. So light energy from the sun normally travels through space and also reaches the earth, and some of it now it tend to, it get turned into heat energy. We tend to warm the earth air. So this is how it happens. There's also a diagram that I place here. It shows the light waves in which it moves, and then it has the crest, and then the distance at which it travels. So light from the sun also light from the sun also travels to cells of green plants, and the green plants tend to carry out what is called photosynthesis. So plants also need that light, and that light is very important because it is used in the production of food, and that is what we eat. We eat that food that is produced through the sun when it supplied that light to the green plants to produce food so that we can eat, and that is now stored in that plant as energy. So when the light reaches an object, it is actually absorbed. Sometimes it gets reflected, or it may pass through. So there are now different bodies or objects that tend to absorb or reflect or allow light to pass through them. So as you can see, sun is the main source. Without sun, we can't have any light produced. But we also have other sources, other different sources that can produce light, such as the lightning. I've already alluded to that. You have fire. Fire also provides light, and car lights. You have torches. You have some sparkling lights. Some people also use that during Christmas, and all these are other sources of light. But the main source of light is mainly the sun. But you also have some insects that tend to produce light as well at night, particularly at night. So you may be able to see that, but the source that they produce is limited, so it does not give clear I mean, that's not light so that it provides light to every place. But we also have lamps in our rooms. Sometimes you realize that when you need light, you just switch it on, and then you have light coming on as a source of, I mean, so that you use it for studying as well. Now, we have different bodies that tend to absorb, like I indicated earlier, light. Some are allowed to pass through. But what happens when light strikes a glass or wax paper or a box? That's a question that we need to ask ourselves. So, should light now strike on a glass or wax paper or a book? What normally happens? Excuse me. So, we realize that if light travels through an object, that is called now transparent because it passes through it. That object is regarded as transparent. So if light is blocked by an object, like in a dark shadow, I mean, you realize a dark shadow is normally cast. So that is now called opaque. That object is called opaque because it blocks the light from passing through it, and sometimes it tend to uh, uh, cast a shadow. So that is opaque. So if some light passes through but not all, you have now a light shadow which is also present. That is now what is referred to as translucent. So these are different objects which allow light to pass through or block light to pass through or only allow a little, some of the light to pass through it. That is now translucent. So this is just to understand what happens to light when it strikes different surfaces. Um, the transparent objects, these are things such as the window of a school bus, windows of a classroom, or a clear empty glass like I have here with my water. So it's actually a clear surface which allows light to pass through, and you have a clear window pane. You have a lens of some of the eyeglasses. This is why some people who have eyeglasses they can see clearly. And you also have clear plastic wraps, which you can see. Those are see-through wraps. Glass on a clock or a watch, you can see through it. So all these are transparent objects, such as also a hand lens, and yes, we can see through them because light passes through each of them. This is why they are regarded as transparent objects. Anything that allows light to pass through it is called transparent because it allows light to pass through it, and you can see through it. Um, Now, when you do not see anything, or you only see part of it, that is now translucent. So, translucent objects such as the the thin tissue paper. You also have the waxed paper and a tinted car window. So most of the cars have tinted windows, so you can see but not clearly. So as you can see in this picture here, you can see that person, but you cannot see that person clearly. So even the T-shirt that the person is wearing, you may not, or a top, you may not be able to see it clearly. So even you can't recognize where a person is. So that is because it does not the surface where the person is does not allow that at all. So frosted glass, so it's also translucent as well as clouds. So all these All these materials are translucent because they only allow some light to pass, but the light cannot clearly cannot be clearly seen through. So that is what we refer to as translucent. We now have to see what is opaque. The opaque objects are dark, such that they do not have light. I mean, they don't allow light to pass through them. So we have heavy weight paper, we have cardboards, we have aluminum foils. So you don't see whatever is covered or wrapped with aluminum foil at all. The mirrors, bricks, buildings, and your eyelids and the hands. You can't see through them at all. Those are some of the objects that cannot allow light pass through. Solid wood doors. When you close your door, nobody sees what is inside, or cannot see whether you are inside or not, because it doesn't. The surface does not allow that. So all these are opaque objects because light cannot pass through them at all. They cast a dark shadow. So these are the differences between all these three objects, which when it comes to light. So they don't. There are those that allows light to pass through. Some only allow some of the light to pass through. Some do not allow light to pass through them. So that's how you can differentiate them. We also need to see how light travels. There's a scenario, and this is always important, that light travels in a straight line. But how do we clearly demonstrate that? So I've now used one of the example here to indicate that light passes or travels in a straight line. So in a homogeneous transparent medium, light travels in a straight line, and this is known as a like linear propagation of light. So for example, you can have three cardboards. You label them. One is A, one is C, and then the third one, I mean, one is B, and then the third one is C. And you make a hole through the center of each of them. They are of the same height, but you just made it in such a way that you make a hole in the center of each of the cupboards A, B, C, all the three of them, to be able to demonstrate whether light passes through them. So now when you place, then what you do, you place a burning candle on one of the sides of the cupboard, particularly at the beginning at A, and then arrange the other cupboards in such a way that the other three pinholes in the candle flame are in a straight line. So the candle flame will now be visible through the pinholes when you look at when you stand behind the cupboard C. Now you'll be able to see the burning candle through that pinhole from C. So because they're actually standing at the same height and they are arranged in such a way that that pinhole is in the center, you will now be able to see that light from the back of C, and whereas the light is actually at the beginning of A. You may will be able to see that. So this is just to indicate that a light travels in a straight line. But should you want to demonstrate that it does not pass, I mean, light travels in a straight line, you just displace one of them. So in this case, now slightly displace any one of the cupboards, either the B or A or C, and try to see if the flame through the pin of the cupboard. You will not be able to see it at all. So if you displace such as now C just a little bit up, you raise it a little bit up, or you move it a bit to the side, then you will no longer be able to see, because it's clear that light travels in a straight line. So this is one of the example of linear propagation, and this is just to demonstrate that light really travels in a straight line. So otherwise, you could see it from any point if it wasn't going to travel in a straight line. The next aspect that we need to look at also here, or that I will discuss with you, is the different parts of the plant flower. So flowers are very important, and they have different parts, and this is to indicate that not all of them have the same parts, because some have the male parts, some only have the female parts. So this is why cross pollination sometimes has to take place, because the same flower does not have both parts. So you now have to have cross pollination of male parts, the anthers coming from a male flower to a female flower. But sometimes you find a flower that has both. That's what is now called self-fertilization. So the female parts are actually the ones on the left hand side when you are standing in front of your computer, and the male parts are the one on your right hand side. So these are formed by a pistil, or the style here. Style is actually in the middle. The middle part is actually the female part, which is formed of a stigma at the top, and the style and the ovary towards the center of the flower, and that is where the seed is normally produced, and that is the part that is gonna form into a fruit with the seed inside. And then the male part here is the stamen, the anther, and the filament. So those are the male flowers. So the anther is actually at the top. The filament is the one that holds the anther at the top, and you also have now the color of the flowers, which are now normally found on the petals, which can be violet, some are yellow, and all that depends on how it will look like. So this is also the female flower. The oval with the embryonic sac is part of that as well. That's where it will be formed. And you have now the sepals. These are just part of the flower, which are protecting the flower before it opens. The sepal, the septacle, and that now stands on a peduncle, which holds it up there in the air, when it's on a plant. So these are different parts, the female parts and the male parts of a flower, which have different functions as well. So you now need to look at their functions and see which functions are actually performed by each of these flowers parts. Another aspect that we will look at is the water and air pollution. Water is very important, and we always indicate that water is life, but we need to have clean water. We do not need to drink polluted water. So water and air pollution. So we have water, which is normally have different pollutants. So you can find that water can be in the river or in the lake or in the dam, but there will be some pollutants. So we have effluent outflow from factories that is already causing pollution to the water, and we have the refinery, which also supplies now. They use water when they are now refining whatever they are producing, and then that water now gets into the water body where we will be able to source it, and that is now polluted. Waste treatment plants, it's also another way of pollution, and this facility emits now fruit into dams and lakes. So that water, when it comes from there, it actually gets channeled into dams or lakes, and it pollutes the water that has to be used by human for drinking or for preparation of food. Other activities that also pollute our water is agricultural activities, such as fertilizers, Fertilizers, when you apply it on the field, you realize that it can, and pests as well. When you spray your pests or apply fertilizer on plants, it get drained. When it rains, the if it sometimes fertilizer is in granular forms, but it tends to get dissolved into the soil, and when it get dissolved after it rains or after irrigation, it get drained into the soil, and then sometimes also end up reaching the water table, and people who are tapping water from that water table through maybe boreholes, they will have water that is polluted, and that will cause so many problems, diarrhea, or whatever will happen, or some sickness, even death may also have. Okay. So improperly disposed of industrial wastage is also one of the pollutant that pollutes water. We have some diagrams that I've shown here of what is normally happening. So you have all that happening, and that is actually toxic. So we also have atmospheric contaminants, uh, such as gaseous emission from automobiles. It's already getting into atmosphere, and when it rains, obviously all that comes down and become poisonous as well, or because of so for example, we have smokes in the industries, and that is getting into the atmosphere. And when it rains, obviously that comes now with the water particles to the earth, and you realize some of the plants, they get their leaves damaged because of that. So because there's a mixture now of gases in the atmosphere which combines with water, and later on cause all those damages either to the roofing of buildings. So factories and bakeries, burning of fossil fuels is already a problem, and exhaust from factories and industries, mining operations. Now all that goes into the air and dissolve in the rainwater, like I've said indicated earlier, and gets back to the earth surface. All that are pollutants, which normally contaminate the water that we use. So this can come from different places, factories, and agricultural activities, as well as atmospheric contaminants. Um, Human and ecosystem and human activities. Um, this aspect now looks at when we talk of an ecosystem, we are actually referring to an area that is composed of living and non-living organisms. But it should function as a way of a system, because it actually relates to the life that it has, which is formed by now the living and non-living organisms. So, for example, if one dies or an animal dies, so all what has to happen, that animal's body has to be decomposed, and through that decomposition, you have now the nutrients and minerals that were now in that animal's body. The body get dissociated and then return back to the soil, and the soil get fertilized, and you find that there will now be grasses growing again, or trees which are growing at the area that is more fertilized by the decomposed body parts, and later on you have the cycle happening again. So, but that there is also influence now on that ecosystem, and that influence is coming from human activities. So, human activity that influence the ecosystem negatively, especially when they performed in an excessive and accessible way, such as agriculture. Agriculture is one of the aspect that distracts or causes, like what is called deforestation. You need to clear a large piece of land, and by clearing a large piece of land, you are negatively affecting the ecosystem already. Because in that ecosystem, a tree that was there, it housed birds, because it has birds that have their nest there and then their eggs. So when you destroy it, you eventually destroyed the functionality of the ecosystem. So you have now agriculture causing all that, and the soil is normally left bare and nothing on it. Erosion is likely to occur. Industries as well, same applies to them. They also cause distractions. To set up an industry, you have to clear a large area, and some of these industries are going to cause what we already looked at, such as air pollution, and dumping of contaminants on the surface, and also in the it becomes a contaminant into our or to our water. Mining, same applies to them, because mining, they all produce some harmful substances which tend to also affect our ecosystem, and you realize that the ecosystem will be affected, such as when we had this issue of desalination that was going to take place in the coastal area. It was going to cause damage to the ecosystem where fish is. Fishing also gets normally negatively affected by the human activities on ecosystems. So desalination was going to cause a lot of damages, because we're going to produce now phosphates, which can be harmful to so many things like fish as well, and that already causes negative impact on our ecosystem. But it is done through human activities. So what is likely to happen is, or have what is happening is, I mean, what was likely to happen is that, or which is still likely to happen is that when you have all these human activities, they will cause what is called global warming, pollution, extinction of species, which are some of I mean, these are some of the consequences that are likely to get towards I mean, as a result of human behavior, and this towards ecosystems. So all these human activities, they negatively affect ecosystems, and we can have global warming, and we already know our ozone layer has depleted somehow, and this is why we are burning, because it is actually a thin layer now to protect us from the sun rays. This is why we are burning all the time, and our temperatures have actually escalated. You realize the area where you are, the temperature is about now 40 degrees Celsius during the day, and that is scorching. So how do we prevent now? How to prevent the destruction of habitat and preserve also by our biodiversity? The term biodiversity here refers to the diversity of life, in our ecosystem. So now for us to prevent the destruction of our habitats and preserve our biodiversity, we need to reduce and also eliminate the use of household chemicals and pesticides. So we need to resort back to organic matter. We use organic matter, such as fertilizer. I mean, not fertilizer, but manure. You collect manure from cattle or animals, then that is what you spray, or you not spraying, but rather spread into your field of crops, and it will also result into higher yield of your produce. But now, when we apply chemical, that is already a problem. So we need to reduce and eliminate the household use of chemical and pesticide. We also need to start recycling as much waste as we can. That's very important as well. We can't just use some of this waste and throw them away. Let's start also recycling them. Reduce the amount of waste you produce. We need to reduce that, and also reduce your carbon footprints. When you have activities such as agriculture, when you clear a piece of land, you are actually contributing towards uh, 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 what is regarded as high carbon into the atmosphere, which will now result into global warming. But what, because plant normally trap carbon dioxide, and they use that for photosynthesis. So when you have a lot of plants, or so many plants or trees and grass on the ground or on the earth, that is already referred to as carbon sink and carbon trapping. But when you clear them, like through deforestation, you have actually contributed to heat stress, which is going to occur, and global warming, because much of that will now get back into the atmosphere, and it's a problem that we are causing for ourselves. So, but we need to start reducing that. Choose foods that are locally grown, and they grown sustainably. We need to avoid the usage of yeah, okay, the usage of GMO. So, and then stick to natural. So there's a structure here that shows the ecosystem, the living plants, and you have living plants also in water. But we need to maintain our ecosystem and let them function appropriately. So this is all I had to present to you today, and I've tried to explain it as much as I could, or I can. So I think I've done justice, and I believe it will help you to prepare yourself quite well during your examination. And should you have some other problems or some other aspect or topics that you feel should be presented, feel free also to indicate to me so that I can also address it. So, all in all, I should wish you good luck for your examination, and thank you so much. Enjoy the festive season, but take care. Thank you so much.